Welcome to our Lunch and Learn. I am Laura, and I'll be your moderator for this presentation. Today, you'll be learning about the subject of navigation, FileMaker navigation and data entry with our presenters, Bobby and Todd. If you have questions, please use the YouTube chat to ask them. If you comment or ask a question during this presentation, you'll be entered into a raffle for a restaurant gift card. Last but not least, this is going to be recorded. So, without further ado, let us just serve you some knowledge.
Perfect. Thank you, Laura. My name is Bobby, and today I'm going to be going over some basics on data types and data entry within FileMaker. So let's get set up here. So a couple things to note. This is definitely meant as a beginner session. So there are a lot of things that we are going to go over, but there's also some things that we will not be going over. And we'll be going over those in different future sessions. So please keep that in mind. Yeah, I think that's about it. So to get started, FileMaker has a very sophisticated database management system. It is a relational database, and it has a couple basic types in it. We're going to go over those data types. There's 8 of them. For the purposes of this presentation, we will be going over 6 of them. The first one is a text data type. Very basic. Pretty much every database system and every application has a text data type in it. It can be any combination of text, numbers, symbols, special characters. It can include return characters, so spaces in it. It is the most commonly used data type, and within FileMaker, it can store 2 gigabytes of data within each field. Some examples, 8675309. So if you do need Jenny's number, you got it right there. Another basic data type is the number data type. It can contain up to 800 digits that could be stored within FileMaker. It can include positive values, negative values, decimals, but it cannot contain carriage returns. That's one of the key things it cannot contain. Data types, again, these are very basic data types in most database management systems. In FileMaker, all dates are based off the Gregorian calendar. Internally, they are stored as the number of days after 1101. It could be displayed differently depending on your use case, and there's different settings for that. That's not something we'll get into in this presentation, but just to be aware of as you start using FileMaker. Time, you could store AM, PM, date, time values based on 24-hour day. It takes into account hours, minutes, and seconds, and internally it is stored as the number of seconds past midnight. Timestamp is something that is kind of unique to FileMaker. It's not really seen as much, but it's a date and a time smashed together. Internally, it's stored as the number of seconds after midnight. One other useful data type that is extremely useful in FileMaker is a container. Pretty much any sort of file can be put into a container, which makes it useful. So JPEGs, PDFs, Excel files, and even FileMaker files can all be stored internally within a FileMaker database. I did mention that there's 2 other data types we won't be going over. Those are calculations and summaries. We're going to save those for later on. So right now, these are our 6 basic data types. So I mentioned that FileMaker is a very, very sophisticated database management system. It also has a user interface layer within it. So that's what we're going to be talking about now, some of those different layout objects and how to do data entry on those. And we're going to start off on an already completed record, and I'm going to kind of just give a brief run through of what we're looking at here. So this is a personnel file for my dog Lucy. Up top we have a container field that has a picture of her. Below we have some text data containing her name. We have a number data field that has her age. We have a date data field with her birthday. We have a time field and a timestamp field shown. And we also have a favorite quote. John, thank you for the comments about Lucy. She is beautiful. Over here on the right, we have some other types of control types, we'll call them. So different layout control types can be used to display different data, and we'll get into those in a second. Okay, so I think we're actually ready to do some test data entry. So one very cool thing about FileMaker is that you have access to all your keyboard shortcuts. So if you hit Command A, it will select all the contents within the field you're in. You could copy, paste, cut, paste, all that good stuff that you can do within the operating system. So I'm going to hit the picture of Lucy and hit Command C just for later on. But for right now, I'm going to hit New Record. I'm going to click on the container field and hit Command V, which will then paste the photo in. FileMaker is really good about giving users different ways of doing things that are easy. And so it makes it very easy to just boop, plop in a photo. I'm just going to type in her name now, just like I would in any other application. Again, since it is a text field, I could put in whatever I want, special characters, return characters, all that good stuff. I'm going to hit Command A, and I'm just going to type in Lucy. I'll put her middle name, Antoinette, because she is a classy dog. So one useful thing that I forgot to mention, or one thing I forgot to mention. So everything on the left here, those are edit boxes, and we also have a concealed edit box. On the right are our more advanced control types. So right now I'm typing into an edit box. There's a bunch of different options with edit boxes. I don't want to get too much in the weeds on the details, but one thing you can do, there's an option to autofill from previously entered values. So that's what we just saw there. Pretty useful for doing data entry. What I'm going to type into now is a concealed edit box, which again is one of our control types that I've listed up here. So the thing to know about concealed edit boxes is that even though the data is to the user shows as concealed, on the back end it's not encrypted at all. So it's not as secure as it might seem, but so just be aware of that as you use it. In terms of doing data entry on age, it's the same thing on a desktop. You can just type in a number. One thing to note, if the number you type in is longer than the field shows, you will get a question mark, as we saw there. For doing date data entry, you do have a nice little date picker box, so you can just kind of scroll through different dates, or you can still hand type them if you prefer. Time is the way that FileMaker handles time data entry is probably my favorite thing about FileMaker data entry. It's very permissive in how you type in the time. So a lot of systems, you'd actually have to type in 3 a.m. like this, very explicitly stated. Within FileMaker, if you just type 3 a.m., it works. Timestamp data entry is a little more difficult, so I'm not going to get too much into there. It's difficult only in that it's a little more selective in how you do it, so we're not going to get too much in detail on that. But again, it's a date and then a time. One unique thing about this edit box is that it does have the ability to, we have this little scrolly box here, and that is a technical term, scrolly box. So if you type in more values than would be seen normally, you can then scroll up and down on it, which is very useful. For our case, though, we're just going to put Lucy's favorite quote, which is "Life is rough." Okay, so now we're going over to the right side. These are more advanced control types. These are your drop-down lists, pop-up menus, radio buttons, and checkbox sets. What makes all these four more advanced is that they are based off of value lists. And I'll show you what I mean here by value list. So when I click there on this drop-down list, there's already a list of values that are shown. And this list of values is preset in a value list. And we're not going to get too much into value lists and how to set them up, but just be aware that they are like abstract objects that you could set up within FileMaker to help guide data entry for users. In terms of what a drop-down list is, it looks like a normal edit box, except for when you click on it, again, you get that drop-down or the value list. You get the value list shown in a drop-down. And then, so it helps guide the user to what you might want them to type. But let's say Lucy's favorite team is actually the Cleveland Browns, and they weren't listed in that list. We could still type that in and be good. So it doesn't restrict what you could enter necessarily, but it helps guide the user to what you want them to do. Now we're going to go over to a pop-up menu. Again, very similar to a drop-down list. One way you could tell a difference is this little doohickey right here. And again, a technical term. So pop-up menus, again, are driven by value lists. The key thing here is that you cannot type in a value into a pop-up menu. So if I start typing, it won't let me type. But what it does do, though, is if the letter I type, it will try to find that within the list. So if you have a super long list, you could possibly help get to your values quicker by typing a value. The other control type that we have here is a radio button, again, driven by a value list. Radio buttons are useful when you want the user to only pick one value out of a list. And you see here, it will only let me pick one, sort of. So there's a way around it. If I hold down the shift button, it will allow me to pick multiple. This isn't really the intended purpose of a radio button. Typically with radio buttons, you use them when you only want one value chosen, which is where the shift value comes in handy because let's say you choose one and you want to deselect it. If you hold the shift button, you can do so. Our last control type that we have here is a checkbox set, very similar to radio button, again, driven off of a value list. Checkbox sets are useful when you want people to select multiple values. So Lucy is a Morkie, which is a mixture of a Maltese and Yorkie. So her favorite dog breed would be all three. Again, checkbox sets are useful for choosing multiple values. Down below, I do have a portal. I'm just going to mention that briefly. So portals are how you view related data within FileMaker. Again, FileMaker is a relational database system, so you have multiple different tables. And so your related data can be viewed easily in a portal. So those are your control types for data entry. A couple things I did not mention. You are able to tab through objects. So you can see here I'm just hitting tab and just kind of going down the list. Enter, I believe. You can also, depending on how your settings are set up, you could hit return and go through a list as well. I don't have that set up as well right now, so that is why it was not working. I just want to show one last thing. I'm not going to get into too many details on this because, again, this is supposed to be an introductory little lunch and learn. These are all the different ways that you can display numbers, dates, and times. FileMaker has a lot of different options for displaying those for whatever your use case is. On the right here, we have different theming options applied to our data entry control types. Though theming will probably be covered in a different lunch and learn down the road. But again, just kind of giving you a little taste of what's to come in the future. So I think that's about it for the basics of data entry. Yeah, we'll cover that later. Yeah. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Todd so that he can go over some menu information. So Todd, take it away.
All right, thank you, Bobby. Yeah, so we're going to look at, because kind of in conjunction with doing data entry, you're interacting with the different FileMaker menus, so we wanted to give you a preview of what those are and what they look like. And many of the menu items that you see in the menu bar here at the top of the screen are going to be very similar to what you see in other applications. The functions and things like that are, comparable and self-explanatory. So we're going to go mention those and then focus on the ones that are unique to FileMaker. But there's also some that are unique to FileMaker but also kind of deserve their own lunch and learn. So we're not going to have a chance to get into those, but don't worry, we'll come back to it. All right, so to start off with, we've got the file menu, which again every application has. You have, the ability to create a new file, open a file, close a file, do your print setup, as well as printing. You can look at your list of recent, which is very helpful. A lot of applications have this as well. So if there's files that you're in there all the time, you're able to pull up that list of recents. Now, a couple that are unique to FileMaker is you have the ability to look at your favorites. So if there's a file that you open repeatedly, instead of making sure that it stays in your recent list, you're able to actually add it to your list of favorites. There's a couple options here to add it. And then, of course, you can remove it as needed. The other one that is unique to FileMaker is this one that's for hosts. And that is if you have a file that is hosted either on FileMaker Server or in FileMaker Cloud, you're able to see the list of those servers and then look at the list of files that are hosted on that particular server to go ahead and open it up. The other ones on this menu you'll learn about when you're older. All right. So over on the edit menu, again, common to all applications, and pretty much all the functions here are, something that you're going to see elsewhere. You've got, copy, paste, cut, find, replace, check spelling, undo, redo are very common in all applications. The ones that's unique here to FileMaker is this one that's currently grayed out at the bottom, which is export field contents. So if I go ahead and make a field active and go back to that menu, you can see here that now I have the ability to do something, and it does exactly what it says. Whatever the contents are of that field, I'm now able to export it to my desktop or to my documents folder, wherever I want to send it. Now, where this comes in helpful is when you're dealing with containers. Bobby already kind of gave us a preview of containers, and what I've done here on this layout is that I've got two containers. One is set up and it's optimized for images on the layout, and then the other one is optimized for interactive content. But what you'll notice is that there is an Excel file that is stored in there, and the only preview that I get is the icon because FileMaker is not sure how to handle a preview of that particular information. So if I were to click on that particular container, now what I'm able to do is when I go back to edit and do export field contents, I'm able to now export that Excel file to my desktop, and then I can go ahead and open it and preview the data with the appropriate application. Moving on, View is another very common menu in lots of applications, but here is where one where we find there's a lot of things that are specific to FileMaker itself. At the top, we have the 4 different modes that you're able to work in. Right now, we are in browse mode, so whether we're entering data or just viewing data, FileMaker considers that browse mode. The other one is find mode, which you enter if you want to search for a specific record. Again, that's the topic that's actually going to be on our next Lunch and Learn, just to be aware that it's there. And then you also have layout mode and preview mode. Preview mode is going to show you how something is going to look if you were to go ahead and print that particular layout, as far as you can check your margins and scaling and orientation before you actually print something. And then layout mode is what you're going to use when you want to build another layout, whether it's for data entry or maybe for a report. Now, of course, depending on your permissions in the file, that option may or may not be grayed out. This is a local file that we have full access to, so we're able to go in and create our own layouts. But if it's a hosted file and you're just a user, that may be grayed out, again, depending upon your privileges. From there, we're able to go down and go to a specific layout. So I can just go here and select another layout that just drops me over here. That is just a very basic admin kind of layout. But you're able to navigate back and forth as you're doing your data entry. We also have the ability to view things as a form, as a list, or as a table. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just create a few new records here so we get an idea of what that looks like. So right now this is a form view. We're looking at one record at a time. Typically this is how you do data entry because you're dealing with one thing and you want to make sure you have that information correct. But when you get into reporting, a lot of time that's where you're going to start seeing things that are a list. So if we switch over to the list, I'm going to say, so yes, I want to go ahead and make that change. And now as I scroll through here, you'll see that the information is repeated on multiple rows. Now obviously this layout is not optimized for a list view, but you get an idea of how it's going to work. The last one is we can view it as a table, and this is a very Excel-like view where you've got a grid of rows and columns. Typically you're not doing data entry from this type of view, but it does give you the ability to kind of see trends in the data because of how it is organized. A lot of admins like this particular view if they're trying to diagnose a problem or things like that. But you're able to switch to this table view. You can do that from the menu. You also have some buttons here that you're able to select. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my form view. Now speaking of our status toolbar, where those buttons are, is that you'd also have the ability to turn that status toolbar on and off. Because it might be whatever your application is, that's just noise at the top and you want to get rid of it, so you're able to toggle it off and get a much cleaner look. I like to work with the status toolbar on. Another thing that you're able to do here is that we go in and we can customize the status toolbar. So if there is a particular function or functions that you're constantly doing, you don't want to have to go digging through it through a menu or one of the menu sets, you're able to go ahead and just drag up and add those particular buttons to your custom toolbar. If you realize, I just want the basic one, they also have ability to reset it, and you can also select whether you're viewing the icon in the text or maybe you just want the icon only to save some space. So there's some few things that you can do there in your customization. That brings us to the formatting bar. As Bobby mentioned, there's you can have text fields where you can insert a lot of text, paragraphs and paragraphs, and you may want to include some formatting. And so what this formatting bar allows you to do is you have those tools front and center to do the the alignment and bold and things like that as you're formatting text. Another thing that you're able to do is to show a ruler. Now I use a ruler all the time when I'm in layout mode. Don't find it very helpful whenever I'm in browse mode. So I usually leave the ruler off as well as the formatting bar and work with it as you see here when I'm in browse mode. And then the last couple things here in the view menu are the ability to zoom in and out, which again is pretty standard across the board. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go back to my other layout. And what we have here under our insert menu is currently everything's grayed out because I don't have any fields active. So we're going to go over here and look at the containers. Now again, on the layout, this particular container is optimized for images. So when I go back to my insert menu, you'll see that I can insert a picture or I can insert a file. The other options are currently grayed out. Now if I select the one that's for interactive content and I go back up to my insert menu, you'll see that I now have all 4 options. So the underlying containers are set up the same way. It's just the way that the layout has been set up to either be interactive or not. Also go over here to a text field. You see I have the ability to insert the current date, the current time, or the current username. It's just something that speeds things up. We can also insert from index, and the index is FileMaker generates an index for pretty much every field type, especially numbers and text, where it's a list of unique values that are in that field across all records, and you're able to select a value and insert from that list. That's not something that I typically do very much, if at all, but just wanted to mention that it was there. The other one is that you have the ability to insert from last visited record. So what does that look like? Well, let's say we have a record here for Nanette, and we want to add a record for her husband. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new record, and his name is, we'll say David, but all the other information is the same. So if I go back up to my insert and I select the from last visited record, it's going to go ahead and carry that last name over from the field in the previous record to this record, and it saves me some data entry. Now, the other thing that we just discovered is that if I go up here to insert, you'll see it's from last visited record. However, if I hold down the shortcut key, which is the command on a Mac, but also include the shift, it's now from last and advance. And this is a great time saving, so if you have to enter information that's the same across multiple records, is that as I use that key, it inserts the value and then advances me to the next field. So instead of having to go insert from last and then go to the next record, it's able to do it and it just follows the tab order that's been set up on the layout. So that's very helpful. All right. So that brings us over to the format. That is another one that's very common to many applications, and it has all the things that you would expect, for font, size, alignment, spacing, and text color. So we don't really need to spend any time there. So we're going to go over here to the records menu set. And that is very unique to FileMaker because we're dealing with records. And so there's a few things here that help us as we are creating records. We'd already used the new record one. We can also duplicate a record. Now what the duplicate is a little bit different than that insert from previous or from last record is that that's dealing with it at a field level because we're just copying data from one field to the next, where duplicate record is actually going to duplicate the record. Which is, again, a great time saver if you've got a lot of information that is the same. The only caveat is you have to remember to go back and change the things that should be different. You don't want to put everything in there at the same price and then find out that a price is different. So you need to be aware of that if you're working through. The other one is actually down at the bottom. And I'm going to go ahead and start making a change. And I've started changing this record. But I realize I've been changing the wrong record, and I want to go back. But I'm not sure what all I changed because maybe I touched more than one field, but the record is still active. I haven't saved any of those changes. Well, now under the records menu, I have the ability to revert that record. So if I select that option, and it says, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And if I say, "Yes, I do want to revert it," it takes me back to that last save state of that record, so I can kind of undo without having to use the undo command. So that's great there. And of course, you also have the ability to delete a record, or you can delete all records in the found set. These are two options, much like the layout. Depending on your permissions in the file, you may have the ability to delete or you may not. So those items could be grayed out. Also, the developer of the file, through the use of a custom menu, could actually even remove those menu items, so it's not even an option to delete. I will say, if you do have the ability to delete, I feel honor-bound to give you the Ben Parker speech, which is, "With great power comes great responsibility." So if you go to delete something, make sure that that's what you want to delete. Okay. From there, we get into a couple things that help us, again, with some navigation. Under the View menu, we looked at the ability to navigate through layouts, but now we have the ability to navigate through the records. And so I can select, to go to, the previous record. I can go back to the next record, or I can also here, select a specific record by number if I wanted to, knew exactly what the record number was and I wanted to go to that. You also have the ability to refresh the window. If you are working on a hosted database, FileMaker is usually very good about pushing those changes from one client to another through the server. But if you want to just refresh to make sure you're looking at the most up-to-date information in a portal or things like that, you're able to refresh your window. I have to admit, it's something that I've found that I rarely have to do, but it is there. And then, of course, you're able to sort records because, just looking at a jumble of records is usually not helpful. You want to look at that in some form of, order. And so if we select sort, we're able to pull up and say, okay, we've already had this sort set up from before where we're going to be sorting by last name and then first name. And so then I can just go ahead and click the sort button. And now I'm looking at sorted records. And I can tell that it's sorted because the status toolbar area is telling me that my found set is now sorted. And then just in case you would ever need to, you also have an option to go ahead and do the unsort as well. Now, there's some record or some information, menu items that we've looked at and kind of skipped over here. They deal with your found set as well as performing finds. And again, because of the nature of that topic, we're actually going to save it for our next lunch and learn. So we'll come back to that. And there's also a couple here at the bottom that deal with editing sets of records very quickly. And that's something we want to spend a little bit more time than what we have today. So we're going to move on. And then from there, the last menu that we want to just point out here is this idea of the help menu. In addition to the traditional help that you would expect to find under the help menu, FileMaker's also provided a number of links to find a consultant or to check for updates. Also visit the FileMaker community to get help there beyond just the normal help files. So I think with that, we're going to go ahead and open it up and see if we have any questions.
Okay. So. Okay, so I have a question here for Bobby. If we had a picture on a desktop, say if it's Lucy, and could you drag it and drop it into a container field?
Yeah, absolutely. If you give me 2 seconds here, I could actually put a picture of Lucy on the desktop, and then we could drag and drop that right on. Oh, you sorted it, didn't you? Yeah. All right, so I'm going to switch over to our desktop view here. All right, so everyone, yes, okay, cool. So everyone can see that. Where's my desktop? If I pull up my desktop here, I have a picture of Lucy right here. It's actually the same one, which might get confusing, so let's delete that one. So we have a picture of Lucy. I'm just going to drag and drop it right into the container field. It'll take a second to process, and voila, we have a picture of Lucy. So yes, you can drag and drop into a container field.
Great. So, there's a question for Todd. Is there a way to change the menu options?
Yes, there is. You are able to do something that's called custom menus. And what that means is that you're able to create your own custom menus if you have certain business rules. You're able to create a menu that has just the tasks that you want your users to do. You also have the ability to modify an existing menu item. For example, if you know that whenever a new record is created, certain fields should be set to certain things, and you want to make sure their users are following through business rules, instead of just creating a new record, you're able to create a scripted process that would kind of guide the user through all of the things that need to be selected, and then drop them into that new record once it's created after the script is finished running.
Okay, awesome. Bobby, can you explain the difference between drop-downs and popovers again?
Yeah, absolutely. So they're very similar. Both are based off of value lists. The main difference is that a drop-down list will allow you to type in a value. Now, depending on what sort of validation you have on that layout object, it may or may not allow that value to stick, but that's the main difference, is that the drop-down list will actually allow you to type in something, where if you type in a pop-up menu, it will just kind of increment through that list, based on what letter you type.
Okay, I have a question for Todd. What are some use cases for a user to delete all records and replace field contents safely?
Let's see. Delete all records safely. That would be if you're doing some data cleanup. If you have a process that maybe archives records that are of a certain age for, like, say, inventory items, and you know that you're never going to sell that item again, you want to archive it, you would find the found set, export it to a separate file so that you could still maintain it, but you don't want it in your live system. And so then you're able to then, go ahead and delete that found set of records because you don't want them in your live database, if you will. And so, obviously you want to be very careful, but that's a use case there because you're just kind of cleaning up after yourself. The same thing with, replace field contents, where you may have a condition where, a description has changed or a price has changed, or, maybe you're, whatever reason you're changing, the part number scheme for your inventory, and you don't want to have to go through every single individual record, but you're able to do some type of calculation on it. You can you can replace the field contents based on that calculation to renumber things, and that's a good use case for that.
Okay. Another question is, when someone's exporting a container field contents, can they automatically open the file that was in the container?
That is a good question. So we're going to go ahead and the answer is yes. I'm going to go ahead and switch back over so you can see our desktop here. And what you can see here is I just, the file that Bobby just dropped into, that picture of wonderful picture of Lucy, is that, I can save it to my desktop, and after saving, I have a couple options here where I can automatically open the file. In addition, you also have the ability to go ahead and create an email with that file as an attachment if that was something that you wanted to do.
Okay. So Bobby, can you customize and control how the control types look, such as icons and such?
Yes, and that is something that we did not get into too much. I'm actually going to switch back to the desktop view here in a second, just to kind of hold on, is it? Got the spinning wheel of death. But yeah, so the short answer is you can. There we go. So what the question was, can I customize some of the colors and different things on these control types, such as the calendar picker and the drop-down menu, and you can. We showcased some of those customization options here. For instance, you could customize the color that the dot is. You could customize the background of the little radio button. For the checkboxes, you could either make a checkbox or an X, whichever suits your purposes better. There's a lot more that we could do too in terms of hovering, so you could have it, change states while you hover over it, change states while you click on it. I think a lot of that's going to be covered in a future Lunch and Learn, but the short answer is yes, you definitely can customize a lot of what you see in terms of the control types.
Okay, so I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to wrap up. So, I want to thank Bobby and Todd for presenting on field control types and menu options, and for those who commented and had questions during the presentation. We'll contact the winner of the raffle after this is all done. Please subscribe to this channel by using the red button below. We'll be doing this Lunch and Learn once a month on the second Wednesday of the month. If you like the presentation, remember to click the thumbs up to like this below here. And I believe that's all. So, oh, and one more thing. if you could fill out the survey, it is currently in the description of the video, so we would appreciate that. You can do that. Also, if you have a topic to submit, that'll be in the survey, or you can contact one of us and we'll talk about it at a future Lunch and Learn. So, again, thank you all, and we are glad to have served you today.